because Skype, when it capture, it is capturing like one head, and the shot will not be good. Here we go. All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador, for joining me. Appreciate it. So I'm sure you're following with the Oslo meeting with the Taliban. So are you aware that the US is supporting this meeting? What's your thoughts about it?
Well, the United States and many of our partners who care about Afghanistan have a very difficult dilemma here. We want to help the Afghan people who are in desperate need of assistance, and we want to hold the Taliban to high standards that they indicated that they would observe, or at least indicated they would talk about when it comes to how they're actually going to constitute themselves and protect human rights and women's rights and rule of law and all that. Those goals are in conflict here. And we desperately want to help the Afghan people who, through no fault of their own, are suffering from healthcare and famine and cold and everything that we know. And at the same time, we don't want to give the Taliban a pass on living up to the commitments that we feel very strongly that they need to uphold. So the meeting in Oslo, the Taliban are obviously going to use that to, as they already have in their press work, try to portray this as the beginning of the recognition of the Taliban as a legitimate government in Afghanistan. That's not true. It's a recognition that there's a reality here that we need to deal with as an international community. And at the same time, we need to have a united approach towards the Taliban as a political instrument and try to use the leverage that we have to get them to adopt the kind of behaviors and inclusive government that the vast majority of the international community thinks is necessary for Afghanistan in the future.
So there's another meeting coming up in Moscow with Afghanistan National Front resistance participation. How do you see these meetings coming along to find a political solution for Afghanistan and perhaps encourage the Taliban to form an inclusive government for Afghanistan?
If the meetings do serve to push the Taliban towards forming a genuinely inclusive government, that would be a good thing. I have my doubts that they actually have any intention of doing that. But still, one has to try. I've seen the reports of the meeting. I don't know how accurate they are, but certainly the Taliban need to begin having a discussion with the political forces and other realities that exist in Afghanistan. And I don't think they're at the stage where they have a genuine will to do that. But we and others and Afghan people need to push them in that direction.
Among the delegation of the Taliban traveling to Oslo is also Anas Haqqani. He's one of the what's called masterminded of some terrorist attacks. And now he's in Oslo, in a Western country, and then a delegation talking to them. What's your thoughts about it?
I think that's very regrettable and a mistake on the part of the Norwegians not to know who they were dealing with. Haqqani doesn't have any business being part of a delegation talking about the future of Afghanistan.
So this meeting also is the first time in a meeting there is a large number of Afghan women activists participating in a direct talk with the Taliban. And I think you saw some of the news at how women are just reacting and how they had this open speech and they have been very loud. What's your thoughts about it? Do you think it will really encourage the Taliban to respect women's rights and listen to them?
I wish I could say that I did, but I don't. It's a good thing that the women and other activists were there and they met with the Taliban. And I saw some quotes from some of the delegation members saying that they thought the exchanges were positive. But that reminds me very much of what was going on a year ago, 6 months ago in Doha, where the Taliban were meeting with various delegations and saying positive sounding things without making any commitments to actually do anything. It's still very clear that their view of the future of role for women in Afghanistan is very different from the view of many Afghans and most Afghan women, I think. That discussion has to be had, but I don't think this one exchange is necessarily a hopeful sign. The only hopeful sign is that they're having a discussion.
So do you think there is a coherence or coordination between US and EU strategy or policies when it comes to approach to the Taliban and also response to the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan?
I think there is good coordination and contact between the Americans and the Europeans and the UN and others. I wish it were stronger and more urgent. Um, I and many others who have a relationship with Afghanistan over the past decade or so have been urging for months that there needs to be speed and political will demonstrated, not just in finding ways to provide the assistance that Afghanistan needs going around the Taliban and not allowing them to exploit it, but also in an accelerated and very strong um, development of a political position and push on the Taliban to get them to move in the direction that we all want to see. That's happening. I wish it would happen more rapidly with a stronger push at senior levels in Europe and in the United States.
So according to the news, Taliban are stressing on and freeze of Afghanistan assets. In Oslo meeting, they're also calling to the UN, and they're trying to find a way to get the names out of those UN blacklists. They have sanctions against them. How likely it is it will happen that there will be an unfreeze for Afghanistan assets for response of humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan?
I think it's very unlikely for a variety of reasons. There are legal reasons as well as political reasons. Um, Very importantly, there's absolutely no guarantee that if the money that's available, not just in the United States, um, from the Afghan government as opposed to individual Afghans, that's a separate category. But the Afghan government assets that are held overseas, if that were money were made available to the Taliban, there's absolutely no way to guarantee how it would be used, how much of it would be siphoned off to serve Taliban interests and their own people. Remember, the Taliban is also, among other things, not just a terrorist group, but it's a criminal enterprise. The Haqqanis being a major demonstration of that. So the ability to rely on them to be stewards of Afghanistan's financial resources is just not there. And I don't think any country is going to agree to free up official Afghan government assets to be returned to the Taliban for the foreseeable future. What we can do and what needs to be done very urgently is to find a way to deploy the international humanitarian and development assistance funds that are already available and becoming available to help the Afghan people get through this winter and get into the spring and the summer.
So, sir, what has to be done more on the part of US and UN to pressure the Taliban to respect human rights? Because there are so many alarming reports came out from the UN, Human Rights Watch, and they're all really pointing to the abuses and it's going on. So what has to be done to stop them and to respect that?
Well, very unfortunately, um, the idea that was being promoted by a number of people in this country, in the government, outside the government, and other places, that the Taliban would recognize that they needed international cooperation and support for Afghanistan, and that they would be more moderate and amenable to having a genuine discussion about a political settlement in Afghanistan has proven to be an illusion. It was a false hope, as I and many others argued at the time. We're now in a situation where they are essentially trying to hold the Afghan people hostage to people who want to help them, and that's at the core of the dilemma that I raised earlier. We collectively, not just in the United States, we collectively, including countries like Russia and Iran and China, need to be clear with them and with the international community that we all want a stable Afghanistan. Almost everybody agrees that requires a political accommodation and an inclusive government. and a government that has respect for human rights and women's rights. And that discussion is going to be a difficult one to bring home to the Taliban leadership. They don't want to have that discussion. They don't want to recognize it. But we need urgently to work to create this common international view and to demonstrate to the Taliban that until they start taking this seriously, they are going to be international pariahs, isolated, and they are not going to be regarded as legitimate.
Yeah, so last question. I'm not sure. UN has a session tomorrow. Security Council is holding a session on Afghanistan humanitarian crisis. What's your thoughts about it? Do you think it will get to a what's called good reason for Afghans and benefit Afghan people, and perhaps there will be some kind of aid again flowing to Afghanistan?
Well, the Security Council has acted recently to loosen the restrictions that existed under Security Council resolutions on transferring funds and goods for relief to Afghanistan, and that was long overdue. It took much too long to do that, but it was a welcome and necessary step. I think tomorrow will be a stock taking of where things stand after the discussions in Oslo, and a reminder to everybody that it's important that the UN appeal for funds for Afghanistan be met by the member states, and that money be delivered, money and goods be delivered as urgently as possible. I hope the meeting tomorrow will give a strong push towards that.
Sounds great. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. I'll just stop the recording. Looks great. We have everything. Thank